Om Namah Shivaya, Shivji Sada Sahai, Om Namah Shivaya, Guruji Sada Sahai. First visit grants all desires. Satsang of Sudeshna and Pushpal Das, Siemens Executive, BBC, London. I first heard about Guruji in 2001 from Colonel D.S. Chatterjee, who showed me Guruji's photograph and told me about some of his miracles. I was then going through a rough patch in life with a new job in a new city. I was supposed to be deputed to the UK within a month of my joining, but even after 9 months, the overseas assignment was nowhere in the distant horizon. On the contrary, I had to shell out a lot in settling down from scratch in an expensive city like Delhi in a rather unforeseen way. I was under immense financial pressure, and to add to our woes, my wife had a miscarriage. This left her with some symptoms, and the gynecologist suggested surgical intervention if the condition did not settle down on its own. We went to Guruji's Sangha at Empire Estate in July 2001, but were greatly disappointed when we were told that he had left for Jalandhar. It was on our next visit later that month that we got first darshan of Guruji. He spoke to us briefly and even ordered us to stay back for langar. Those days people were selectively told to stay back for langar. As we came back home, we felt an unprecedented bliss and calm, and slept peacefully after a long time. Since that day, everything in our lives started to fall in place. To begin with, my wife's condition improved promptly on its own. Within a few months, I got my first overseas assignment, which was a spectacular success, followed shortly afterwards by a long-term overseas deputation, which is still continuing. Few years down the line, we received his greatest blessings in the form of a baby boy. Blood pressure. My wife had a history of high blood pressure and she was put on medication as hypertension could potentially lead to complications during pregnancy, childbirth, apart from other malefic effects. Although the idea of lifelong dependence on medication was not encouraging. She went off all medicines for short spells, but every time she had to fall back on them as her blood pressure started shooting up again. One day in early 2003, at the Sangat at Empire Estate, as my wife and I reached the end of the queue to receive prasad from Guruji, he looked at both of us and said something jokingly about us wearing matching colors. We were both wearing green. Then he asked me how I managed to get this goody from Chandigarh to marry me. This took us by surprise and obviously made us happy beyond words. This was reflected in my wife's blood pressure when she measured it the next day. For the first time in her entire life, her diastolic blood pressure recorded to perfect 80 without medication. Since then, she never had any problems until it flared up during the last stages of her pregnancy. But that did not cause any problem to the fetal growth and did not need delivering the baby earlier than her full term. She had to be on medication during later pregnancy and following childbirth, but was able to come off it shortly later. Overseas assignment. A major factor behind my joining Siemens in Delhi in September 2000 was the associated prospect of long-term overseas placement in the UK, but the latter remained elusive. Though with Guruji's blessings, I had a couple of short visits to the UK. By 2002, hopes of a long-term deputation abroad were virtually dashed with the international depression in IT that followed the 9/11 attacks in the US. However, I kept praying to Guruji both at the Sangat and at home, and in April 2003, a UK deputation finally came my way. Though the assignment was supposed to be only for 6 months, I was very thankful as it came at the unlikeliest of times when companies all around were laying off people by the score. As I was waiting for my work permit and making preparations to leave, I received an invitation card to a marriage reception of one of Guruji's devotees. The envelope that contained the card had the word England written on it by Guruji himself. When we went to seek Guruji's permission just before we left, my wife was going to ask Guru, uh, Pesh, my wife was going to ask Guruji's blessings about her father and her sister, a Down syndrome patient, while we were away. But even before she articulated her concern about her parents, Guruji said, "Sadde to vada parent kaun hai? Who is bigger than, who is a bigger parent than me?" And we realized that we had secured the maximum reassurance that we possibly could in this matter. On my arrival at the site, Blackpool near Manchester, I was told that there was a distinct possibility of the assignment even ending in 4 months instead of 6. However, by Guruji's blessing, not only did the deputation last out its full duration, my contract was further extended for another project at the same time site. This project lasted for 10 more months, and when I was all set to return to India in August 2004, I was relocated to a different location, Telford near Birmingham, within the UK itself for another assignment which lasted for 1 more year. Midway through this assignment, we were relocated to Nottingham, where my child was born just as the project completed. As we were making preparations to travel back to India in September 2005, I was transferred to London on an assignment at the prestigious BBC site in London. The initial deputation was for 3 months, but I have been here for nearly 2 years and it's still counting. Continuing. Transfer to Nottingham. I was on deputation at a small town called Telford in Shropshire, England, when my wife conceived. It was a nice and quiet place to live in, but seemed quite nightmarish in terms of medical facilities relating to pregnancy care. The obstetric unit in the local hospital was run by midwives and did not have a consultant unit. More complicated cases were referred to a bigger hospital at Shrewsbury, which was located around 16 miles away, and it took more than half an hour each way by taxi, apart from the journey being excruciatingly expensive. My wife's history of hypertension meant almost certainly that she would be referred to the Shrewsbury Hospital eventually. We panicked even at the idea of having to travel the kind of distance in the event of any emergency during her pregnancy. But when she went into labor, even though the ambulance service provided by the National Health Services is usually very commendable, although the hospital rules did not permit husbands staying overnight when wives were admitted for delivery, and I desperately wanted to be within a reasonable distance of the hospital, even at night when my wife was admitted, but I could not see that happening if I had to go back all the way home. We left everything to Guruji as usual. One night, my wife had a dream that she was sitting at Guruji's feet, and Guruji had told her to stop worrying as everything will be all right. Within a few days, there was a communication that the unit in Telford was closing down and the staff was being relocated to Nottingham, a bigger city with much better facilities. Eventually, my child was born in Nottingham in Queen's Medical Hospital, which is rated as one of the best in the UK in terms of pregnancy care. Nottingham House. While our relocation was welcome from the point of view of medical facilities, our project team was then snowed under with workload and we were not allowed the luxury of visiting Nottingham. 2-3 hours by train in advance to look up houses to rent. Instead, our client was entrusted with the task of looking up accommodation for us. No exception was made, even in my case, despite my emphasizing to my manager the significance of the choice of this accommodation for us, as my wife would have to spend the rest of her pregnancy in there with no one else to look after her. A few prospective houses were looked up by the client, and the associated documents, internet links, were sent across to me in the next few days. But they did not seem to work for us, and I turned them all down. Even before all this had started, I had casually gone on the internet, and on the very first search there that I fired, I had hit upon a house that looked good and was reasonably close to the renowned Queen's Medical Hospital, where my wife was likely to be referred to for pregnancy care. However, I had absolutely no idea of what the area was like, and even though the photographs posted on the site looked nice, it would have been too much of a gamble to go by them alone. But now, not liking the houses that were being looked up by the client anyway, we decided to go for the house that I had looked up myself at the beginning, without even asking the client to evaluate the same on my behalf. This was somewhat to the discomfort of my own project manager, as I was in a way overruling the judgment of his superior. But we put our trust in Guruji and went with our own intuition. That house turned out to be the best one that we have stayed in while in the UK. The house, as well as the furnishing, was in excellent condition, and it was 10 minutes walking distance, 3 minutes drive from the Queen's Medical Hospital. In a team of around 10 people that were relocated, everyone else ended up having serious issues with the accommodation that had been looked up for them. Fetal heart rate. It was one of the regular visits to the Pregnancy Assessment Center in the Queen's Medical Hospital, and my wife was put on the fetal heart rate monitor. Usually, it varied between 140 to 170, but on that particular day, it was bordering 200 from the start, and then suddenly there was some fetal movement, and the thumping just went crazy. The reading shot up to nearly 220 and stayed up at that level. Up until then, the midwife was putting up a casual front saying that 200 was very high, but not an abnormal fetal heart rate. But how now she quickly rushed off to seek advice from a superior. Fearing that the fetus was experiencing some stress, I placed Guruji's photograph, given to us by Guruji, on my wife's bum and chanted the Mrityunjaya mantra silently. Within a few seconds, the heart rate went down to normal and stabilized, and by the time the midwife rushed back with her senior colleagues, things were normal. Childbirth and following complications. In 2005, by Guruji's grace, we were blessed with a baby boy. He was born in the Queen's Medical Hospital in Nottingham, UK, when I was then there deputed. My wife had a very long and painful labor. At one stage, her diastolic blood pressure had even shot up to 132 despite repeated medication, and she was delirious, leading the doctors to consider the option of performing emergency C-section operation. However, on praying to Guruji, her condition settled down and the baby was delivered normally. Our joy on the birth of a healthy child was soon replaced by deep concern as initial blood tests in the child revealed some infection and the child was not passing urine in the first few days after he was born. The doctors were not very sure about the source or the nature of the infection. As part of the investigation, they attempted lumbar puncture a few times on the second 2 day old child, but failed to get a sample of the spinal fluid. As a result, they put him on a range of antibiotics, which they expected would deal with the infection irrespective of its nature. However, the doctors were more worried about the baby not passing any urine in about the first 4 days after birth, despite being fed a lot more than the usual amount, at times using a drip to overcome any possible dehydration. Some of them seemed to start suspecting his kidneys as the kidney function test results were way off normal limits, while the others advocated ruling out dehydration as the underlying cause by pushing more fluids down the baby before writing him up for a kidney scan. To add to problems, my wife developed a severe urine infection with her temperature shooting up to 105 degrees. Both the mother and baby being poorly, they were moved to a critical care unit. I was absolutely alone in an alien land with no family or relatives. Even my colleagues had left as the project had ended. Guruji's photographs, the latter was given to us by Guruji himself, and we touched it to the baby's body and placed it on his cot time and again. And his blessings were all that we had to look up to under such adverse circumstances, and we prayed to him more intensely than ever. Very soon things fell into place. The baby passed his long awaited first urine, and we never heard about his infection again. The doctors now felt that probably the infection that showed up in the baby's bloodstream was actually his mother's. My wife recovered after being treated with strong antibiotics, and both were released nearly after a couple of weeks after childbirth. Transfer to London. Though the deputation to Nottingham had ended following its successful completion and all my colleagues had left, we had to stay back as my wife was into her ninth month of pregnancy then and could give birth any day. Even after my child was born, we decided to stay in the UK for one more month before we flew back to India with the baby. However, we were strongly advised against doing that before the child was at least 3 to 4 months old, as the flight could potentially damage his eardrums irreversibly. My line of business manager in India promised to speak to the UK operations to look up a back to back assignment for me in the UK itself, but the chances of anything matching my skill profile turning up at a convenient location looked very slender. We kept praying to Guruji to remedy the situation, and within a week of my child's birth, I received a call from a business manager in the UK asking me whether I could move to the BBC site in London in a fortnight. Despite the complications following childbirth and my wife still being in a lot of pain, Guruji's blessings enabled us to pack up lock, stock, and barrel and turn up in London with our 3 week old child in time for the new assignment. The drive to London from Nottingham took 6 hours because of bad traffic instead of the normal three and was excruciatingly painful for my wife. But by Guruji's grace, she recovered quickly once in London, which is where we still are. Shukrana, Guruji.